Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to Coin Crusader. I've got a loaded update for you today, and trust me, you are not going to want to skip this one. We're going to dig into some fresh news that just dropped, including the fact that Roger Ver, one of the earliest names in Bitcoin history, is now sounding bullish on XRP. I love this, and we're going to break down exactly what he said. On top of that, we've got Saylor making moves to get close to President Trump. And of course, we're going to talk about what that could mean for the crypto space as a whole. And then, just to make things even more interesting, there's a number making its rounds all over Twitter right now that has people talking. $57,750 per XRP. Yeah, you heard that right. And we're going to dive into where that number is even coming from. So buckle up, because there is a lot to unpack in this video. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let's start with where XRP is sitting right now. As of this moment, XRP is trading around $2.67, and we are cooling off a bit, down roughly 8% on the day. Now, a lot of this pullback could be tied to everything happening with tariffs right now. There's a tariff war brewing, and that kind of macro uncertainty tends to spook the broader market, crypto included. Nobody loves seeing red candles, but this is the kind of thing we've seen before, and markets have a way of working through it. Hopefully things settle down soon so we can start looking toward the upside again, because right now the overall mood in the crypto space feels a little heavy. That said, even with the price action looking shaky, the news cycle is still full of bullish signals. And one of the biggest ones just came from a name you definitely know. That name is Roger Ver, and he just dropped some comments about XRP that caught my attention. He was asked about Ripple getting into the stablecoin space, and on top of that, the fact that you can actually build smart contracts directly on the XRP Ledger. When asked what his outlook is for Ripple and XRP over the next 5 years, he said he's pretty bullish overall. His reasoning is that Ripple, as a company, has been one of the most effective players in the entire industry when it comes to things like lobbying and getting their foot in the door with major businesses through big contracts. He gave them serious credit for that. He went on to say that with so many smart, creative people working across this ecosystem, it's honestly hard not to be bullish on the whole space. He also tipped his hat to the Ripple executive team for everything they've built so far, and made it clear that if he has to choose between government-backed systems and the private sector, he is choosing the private sector every single time. For those who don't know much about Roger Ver, this is a guy who carries a lot of weight in this space. He was actually the world's very first investor in a long list of major Bitcoin and crypto startups, including Bitcoin.com, Blockchain.com, Ripple, and Kraken, just to name a few. This is someone who clearly understood what was happening with crypto extremely early on, long before most people even knew what Bitcoin was, and he has been massively rewarded for that foresight ever since. So when someone with that kind of track record starts talking positively about XRP and Ripple, it's worth paying attention to. It's not just hype from a random account online. It's coming from one of the original pioneers of this entire industry. And that carries a different kind of weight in my book. Now, this next one made me laugh, and I think you're going to get a kick out of it too. There's a meme going around right now pointing out the difference between wanting to be in the room and actually being in the room. The context here is that Saylor has said he's willing to advise President-elect Trump on crypto policy. And the joke, of course, is comparing that to people who already have real influence and access. I thought it was genuinely funny, and honestly, it says a lot about where things stand right now in the industry. Everyone wants a seat at the table, but not everyone is actually getting invited to sit down. It's a small moment, but it captures the current vibe in crypto pretty well, where some of the biggest names are scrambling for political access, while others already seem to have it locked in. Personally, here's my take on the whole Saylor situation. If Saylor actually sat down with Trump, my gut feeling is that Trump might find his style a little off-putting. The way Saylor talks and presents himself is very particular, very intense, and I just don't think that's the energy Trump tends to connect with. I think Trump is far more likely to vibe with people like Brad Garlinghouse or Stuart Alderodi from the Ripple side of things. That's just my personal read on it, but I would genuinely love to hear what you all think down in the comments. Honestly, we'd all love to be a fly on the wall if Trump and Saylor ever do meet face to face. But here's the bigger picture. The biggest Bitcoin advocate on the planet is now actively trying to get in front of Trump. And that tells you something. They are paying attention, and frankly, they should be. It's interesting to watch unfold in real time. Switching gears a bit, there's some solid on-chain data worth talking about. The XRP Ledger reportedly processed around 1,500 transactions in a single ledger close, while Bitcoin, on the other hand, is currently seeing historically low network activity. That's a pretty stark contrast when you put the two side by side. Some reports even pointed to a number closer to 1,778 transactions within that particular block. Now, transaction counts alone don't tell the whole story, but it is interesting to see XRP's network humming along with strong throughput at a time when Bitcoin's on-chain activity has slowed down so noticeably. Numbers like this tend to get passed around in crypto circles as proof of real-world usage. And whether or not you put a ton of weight behind them, it's still worth keeping an eye on as the broader narrative develops. And then there's this headline that's been making waves, suggesting that Japan's financial system could see every single bank in the country gain the ability to utilize Ripple's XRP starting as soon as next week. Now, to be clear, this would mean banks having the option to use XRP, not necessarily a guarantee that they all will. Whether or not these institutions actually choose to use it remains to be seen. And honestly, none of us can predict that with certainty right now. But as more details come out, the thing to really watch is the price action and the transaction volume on the network. If more institutions start actually moving XRP and processing real transactions, that should eventually show up in the data, both in terms of network activity and how much value is flowing through those blocks. I'll be keeping a close eye on this story as it develops, and I'll make sure to bring you any updates the moment they drop. Now let's get into that wild $57,750 XRP number, because there's a whole theory behind it. The argument starts with the history of Bitcoin's launch back in October of 2009, when it was valued at roughly 0.007 of a cent per coin. XRP, on the other hand, launched in June of 2012 at just under a penny. Based on those starting points, Bitcoin actually launched at a value something like 1.2 million% lower than where XRP started. That's a pretty wild gap right out of the gate, and it sets up the entire comparison that follows in this theory about where XRP could eventually head if it followed a similar growth curve. Here's where the theory gets really interesting. Fast forward 3 years from Bitcoin's launch, and it had climbed all the way up to around $13.30 per coin. That works out to a staggering 1.75 million% increase in just 3 years. Now apply that same 3-year window to XRP starting from its 2012 launch, and XRP was still sitting at roughly a penny, only managing about 10% growth over that same stretch. So why the massive difference? The argument is that Bitcoin was built from the ground up to be the peer-to-peer cash system the world was craving, and that was literally laid out in Satoshi Nakamoto's original white paper. But as time went on, people started noticing Bitcoin's scalability issues, and that's when banks and payment systems around the world began turning their attention toward XRP instead, especially around 2016 and into 2017. That shift is a key part of this theory. Bitcoin eventually pivoted in the public narrative toward being seen as a store of value, essentially digital gold, rather than the everyday payment system it was originally designed to be. And according to this theory, that pivot is exactly what fueled the massive 2017 bull run, because capital started flowing into coins that actually had real utility, the ones built for that peer-to-peer payment function the world still needed. So today the argument goes, you really can't afford to ignore coins that are filling that exact need. And if Bitcoin eventually gets fully reassessed purely as a store of value, the theory suggests XRP could get unleashed in a similar way Bitcoin did in its early years, which mathematically, according to this comparison, could put XRP somewhere around that $57,750 mark. Now, personally, I think there are some pretty big leaps in that logic, and I'd want to see a lot more solid evidence before fully buying into a number that big. But it's certainly an interesting thought experiment to chew on. Let's pivot to something a little more lighthearted, because the Super Bowl is coming up next weekend, and I have to say, I've actually been heading over to a friend's place the last few weekends to play some Texas Hold'em and watch football, and it's honestly been a blast. But here's an interesting crypto angle tied into this. Ever since the FTX collapse, crypto companies have largely been kept out of Super Bowl advertising, and it's unclear whether that trend continues this year. There's a report floating around suggesting Ripple could be eyeing an $8 million Super Bowl commercial slot. A 30-second ad spot during the big game would put XRP in front of well over 100 million Americans in one shot. For context, a recent Super Bowl pulled in roughly 123.4 million viewers, making it the most watched broadcast in television history. If Ripple actually pulled the trigger on something like that, it could end up being one of the biggest marketing moments the company has ever had. Speaking of the Super Bowl, I have to ask, who are you rooting for, the Eagles or Kansas City? I genuinely want to hear your predictions down in the comments below. If Kansas City pulls it off, that would be their third Super Bowl win in a row, and that has never happened before in NFL history, so that alone would be a massive storyline. That said, I have really been enjoying watching the Eagles lately, and I think they're playing some fantastic football right now. My hope is that this game doesn't turn into a blowout either way. I want to see it come down to the wire because those are always the most fun games to watch. A huge chunk of you watching this channel are from the United States, so I am genuinely excited to read through your predictions and see who you're all backing this year. In other news, Charles Hoskinson recently teased that February is shaping up to be a pretty wild month. He didn't go into specifics, just said there's something in the works that he can't talk about just yet, but hinted that it's going to be exciting once it comes out. It sounds like there could be some meaningful developments brewing on the Cardano and ADA side of things, so that's definitely something worth keeping an eye on as the month progresses. And speaking of major partnerships happening behind the scenes, if you're not already familiar with Mojaloop, this is essentially a financial inclusion initiative tied to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working across Africa and other regions around the world. And it actually runs on the Interledger protocol alongside XRP. There's a video clip going around explaining exactly how this partnership functions from a technical standpoint, and I want to walk you through what it actually says. The explanation goes something like this. Mojaloop's system uses the Interledger protocol because of the finality provided through a cryptographic signature carried within the payment instructions themselves. This allows for straight-through processing without needing constant reconciliation or dealing with disputes down the line, which helps avoid the kinds of errors that lead to costly delays, something that lower-income users especially cannot afford to deal with. The system offers a way for both banked and unbanked individuals to exchange funds safely, quickly, and securely. It also provides confidence that payments are actually reaching their intended recipients, full transparency for all parties involved regarding the complete terms of any transfer, and certainty around the finality of credit payments. They've also expanded this functionality into traditional payment infrastructure by incorporating the necessary interledger data elements into ISO 20022 messaging standards, allowing everything to be exchanged seamlessly from end to end. It's honestly wild to think about how much groundwork is being laid behind the scenes, while most people are completely unaware it's even happening. Now here's the part that really stood out to me because it speaks to just how efficient this system actually is. A Ripple-powered system using XRP can apparently be implemented and fully operational within just 2 to 3 months. Guys, that is a massive deal when you think about how banks typically operate. Traditional infrastructure upgrades at most banks can take a long time to roll out, with the fastest implementations usually taking around 6 months and plenty of others stretching to 12, 18, or even 24 months or longer. It's historically been a slow, tedious process that requires bringing in outside experts and spending a ton of money retraining entire teams just to get everything running smoothly. Ripple, by comparison, can apparently hand a bank anywhere in the world a full blockchain-based payment rail in just 2 to 3 months, and in some cases even as fast as 3 weeks. That kind of turnaround time in the banking world is genuinely remarkable, and it's worth sitting with for a second. There was even a direct quote from someone involved in the onboarding process explaining how this works in practice. They said that typically the full process takes about 2 to 3 months from start to finish, with a good chunk of that time dedicated to onboarding, including a credit review process, followed by a relatively straightforward onboarding stage. On the technical integration side specifically, that piece usually takes somewhere between 1 to 2 months, covering things like testing and full system integration. The fastest implementation this person had personally worked on came in at around 3 weeks, which is incredibly fast for the banking world, while the slower implementations tend to land closer to that 3-month mark. Ultimately, it comes down to how many resources a bank is willing to put behind the rollout, and Ripple positions itself as ready to support that process every step of the way. So that pretty much wraps up everything for today's update. As this story keeps developing and more information comes out, I will absolutely keep bringing it to you right here on this channel, every single day if there's something worth talking about. If you enjoyed this video and you're planning on coming back for more updates like this, I'd really appreciate it if you considered subscribing to the channel. And if you want instant notifications the moment new content drops, go ahead and tap that bell icon so you never miss an update. I appreciate every single one of you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.